Hey, greetings once again. This is Mart with Max Q and another weekly video update on the J-3 Cub Restoration project. This week actually has kind of been interesting. This last week, it feels like maybe 2 weeks have gone by, and that's the first time that I felt like I've gotten so much accomplished. And part of it is because I've been working on the fabric inside the cockpit, which has, I'll just be totally honest, I've been freaked out about that whole process for 6 months because I've never done it before. When I did the Super Cub, it had aluminum panels. I put leather on it. I had, high attention to detail. That airplane turned out fantastic. But it was an entirely different process inside the cockpit than what a J3 has. And there just looks like there's an awful lot to it. And of course, I try to set the bar really high. I want to do a really great job. So sometimes that creates a little bit of stress. As it turns out, it's going really well. And I just feel like I've learned so much. And for me, I think I have to do it before I really fully understand it. And everybody's a little different that way. But for me, and it obviously it helps to be able to see what's going on. That's essential. But it's still not real, of course, until you make it real, when your hands really do the work. So we'll go over that here in a few minutes. But first, I think I might have mentioned something about the throttle knobs that were on this airplane. I can't remember for sure. I know I put a Facebook post up about it. But anyway, the throttle knobs that were in this airplane were this really dark red, and they're black underneath. So I don't know. I just really don't know if this was a Piper process or if somebody painted these red, but it's not just paint. It's a super durable. It's just that it's old and it is flaking off. So I went looking for some knobs that would be the right size, that would have the proper thread on it to mount on the throttle levers, which I'm getting this removed. So this still hasn't been blasted and painted, so this is the way it was in the airplane. But this is essentially the throttle lever and the throttle knob. So again, this was the old one. They have a steel threaded insert then that goes on here. So I needed something that was very similar, and I found these on eBay. They're same size. They have absolutely the right thread. And then the thing that I was looking for, two things specifically. One, I needed a red that at least seems complementary. It's not exactly, obviously, it's quite a bit different, but it's not an icky red. And, that's obviously everybody has a different opinion of what icky is. But in my opinion, this is a red that I think will look pretty good. But the specific thing that I did here, that I also did on the Super Cub knobs, which those were black, and I found them kind of the same way as an aftermarket piece, but with, again, these steel threaded inserts in them. But what I did was I took a 3/8 bolt. This is actually a coarse thread. Cut the head off, thread it in, put it in the drill press, and then I used a combination of Scotch-Brite, a couple different Scotch-Brites, and some 600 grit sandpaper to take the gloss off of it, because these were really high gloss. Again, these, I should say, they're not painted. The color is molded right in, which is actually quite nice in the long run because we won't have any of this kind of issue going on. But again, I wanted a color that looked really good. And I just, I talk about this a lot, and people probably think I'm crazy, but I just don't like glossy things. And so to me, things look, they just look better when they have a satin finish on them. And so that's what I've put on this. It's a really nice low gloss satin finish, feels fantastic. And that's the other thing that's kind of nice about it, is instead of being glossy and slippery, this has got a satin. It's not a flat finish, but it's just a beautiful satin, and they have just a little bit of grip to them. And of course, throttle knobs, you don't want them to be slippery. So I'm really happy with the way these have turned out. I think they're going to be fantastic. And I should have some black paint from Stewart's here before too long, a special color of black for the airplane that then I'll be able to blast these kinds of parts and get them painted. I got a whole bunch of cockpit parts, the rudder pedals and the torque tube and things like that are waiting on that paint, which will be here pretty soon. And so we'll be getting those things wrapped up here pretty quick. So that's the throttle knob situation. Now, here's an interesting thing I wanted to mention real quick about pinking shears. So I've had these pinking shears since the Super Cub project, and they weren't doing a very good job of cutting anymore. Sometimes they would cut okay, and then sometimes they wouldn't, and I didn't seem to understand what was the difference that was causing that. And for the kind of stuff I've been doing so far, none of it's going to be seen, so I wasn't real particular about the fact that sometimes the pinking edge was a little bit smushed and it didn't look the best. But I thought, hey, I'm getting to the point now where I'm going to be doing some pinking that's going to show, and I need it to look a lot better. So I thought, well, it seems like, in fact, I had a guy tell me back in the 80s that if you polish the surface here on the back side, if you grind that, you know that it should sharpen. That's how they sharpen them. Well, I've tried that in the past and it didn't do a thing. And I think it's because you can't really control the proper angle so that the edges are sharp as they come together. So I went looking on the internet real quick, and I found a YouTube video from a gal. Her YouTube channel is Seams Legit, and that's S-E-A-M-S. So that's kind of cool right there. And she's quirky, a little on the crazy side, and fantastic. And so her real short video was how to sharpen your zigzag scissors, as she calls them, or pinking shears. So what she shows is basically, so here's what I got to mimic that. So I went to Menards, and because that was the easiest place to find what would be similar to what a chef might use, that the rod that they use to sharpen knives, and it's got the diamond grit on it and such. I don't know exactly what the deal is, but I didn't see any way to get one of those real quick here in town. But I saw Menards had this little tiny one, and it's not completely, it's not just a rod. It's got a flat on one side, it's got a V-groove here, but these two surfaces here are part of that circular cross-section. So I thought, well, I'm going to give that a try. And so what she does is she just, and I'll share the video, it's in the description so you can check it out. It's real short, I think it's under a minute. And but basically, you just try to cut that with your scissors, which is a little bit of a challenge. I found it didn't want to eject it, slide it down. So I did a little motion where I just sort of rocked this as I was putting pressure on here, and basically it's a motion like this. I did that like 6 or 7 times was all I did, and I tried them, and they cut perfect. Absolutely perfect. So, like, and maybe this is common knowledge. I don't know. In the past, it seemed like pinking shears were a mystery, especially when it came to sharpening. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just behind the times. But I was really thankful that, of course, YouTube and such, you can find answers to things so quickly and easily. And honestly, when I saw that video, I thought, I don't think this is going to work. I really don't think it's going to work. And it was unbelievable, because literally 6 or 7 of those passes that I made, and you could see that it had scratched the surface there, and I tried it and it cuts absolutely fantastic. So, and I guess I've got a little piece of 2-inch tape here. This is the factory edge on the long sides, and then these are the ones I just cut with these scissors here just before the video. And they're a little different size, which you run into that a lot, because whatever the factory makes and then whatever you use here, but it doesn't matter. But the thing that's kind of interesting, if you don't know, the whole idea that I understand anyway about why we have the zigzag edges is that, for one, it creates more surface area or linear distance for the gluing process for holding a tape in place. So I think that's part of it. And then the zigzag seems to reduce raveling or unraveling, which, have you ever noticed? Ravel and unravel mean the same thing? That doesn't make any sense. But anyway, but the pinking seems to really help that way, and it just looks cool. Now, the other thing that's kind of interesting too is, and I think I mentioned this once before in a video, but back in the, I think it was maybe the late 70s and into the early 80s, but I could be off a little bit on the time there, but the manufacturers started creating tapes that had a cut straight edge. They didn't have the pink on it, because what they were doing, they were using like a hot knife, and it would sear the edge shut so that raveling wasn't an issue at all. But the problem was it didn't want to lay quite as flat, and it didn't look as cool vintage. I don't know. I'm really glad that basically straight edge tapes, I assume you can still buy them, but it's clear that pinked edge tapes have redominated the market, and I think that's awesome. One last thing about pinkers here. So I got these then also for the project, which is like a zigzag wheel that runs up against a flat surface wheel, and the fabric goes in between them, and it's driven by the action of your hand. And these work pretty good, but I haven't gotten very comfortable with getting a really nice straight line with them. So I can see that there are times, and especially with some good skill, or maybe if they just click with you, but honestly, I really like just a nice, really clean cutting pair of pinking shears, and now I have that again. So that's pretty cool. So anyway, okay, let's get on to looking at some of the fabric here inside the cockpit. All kinds of things, I think, to go over there. First, in the last video, I did have the baggage bag was in place, and but one other thing I've done with that I made here is a plywood bottom to go in there. So there it is down in there, and that'll get stained like the floorboards, which of course there's the floorboards just sitting in there again for the sake of the video. But so I made this piece of plywood just a little bit smaller than the dimensions of the bottom of the bag, and I put little radius corners on it, sanded it up clean, and so that'll just help to create not only a nice flat bottom, but a place to put stuff that is less likely to fall over. Like, there might be some things that you'd prefer didn't fall over. So anyway, I think that's a nice little addition to that. And again, it seemed like that the baggage area went in pretty well. I should have taken pictures along the way. Again, I've been a little stressed out about all this stuff that I've not done before, and so I didn't think to take some pictures. But the bag has well, and I think the older bags, these tabs that were sewn on, or strips that were sewn on, were actually done in the Dacron fabric. This one, which came from Univer and is made by Airtex, it looks like maybe they've changed to a different material, because this is more of a heavily textured vinyl. It's very flexible, and I think the glue sticks to it really well. I had no problem with that for sure. So it's just a little more robust and a little bit different than the fabric, you know, like the Seconite type fabric that the others that they used to do. I don't know. But anyway, basically they have two flap edges. I think you can see this one here a little bit. I haven't trimmed this off, and I may just leave this like this because it's a little harder to get in there and trim this. But they were nice long tails, and there were two. So one would be able to go over the tube, and the other one would go around the tube the other way, and they overlap. So anyway, as it turns out, seems like that all went pretty darn well. The key would be just getting your corners pulled in as snug as you can. These are a little tight, but they'll be fine once it all goes together. And then the other thing was, I wasn't exactly sure how far down it should be from the tubes, because you could have the canvas part right up on the radius here. I chose to do it down just a little bit, but I don't really know. So part of this is going to be a learning experience. But you know, that's the whole process right there. So this is something else that's kind of interesting, that with this airplane, I didn't take it apart. Now, when I did the Super Cub, it was all essentially together still, except the wings had been removed. Basically, when I took it apart, I took a picture of everything, so I knew exactly what was supposed to go where. With this airplane, it was already disassembled, already the fuselage was basically prepped. The wings were still covered, but then there were just boxes and boxes of parts. And so it's been a little more of a challenge, especially because there is a difference in the parts between a Super Cub and a regular Cub, a J3. So anyway, I was wondering what goes on at the edges of the lid that goes over this, because usually there's a little plywood lid that goes over the baggage area. So I started looking both online and in the parts manual and blah, blah, blah. And I finally figured out there's aluminum pieces that go at the edges here. So I went through the boxes, and sure enough, I found them. I blasted them, and so cleaned them up. And so these wind up going in here. And of course I matched up, sure enough, there's holes for a screw up here and a screw back here. And then these little clippy things are for coming up across the top surface of the lid, which hinges back here. There's a couple of holes on both sides for the hinges for that door. And then these are just little catches that you can slide out of the way to open the door, and then you can close them to keep the door from flopping open when you have the door open for flying. So these are absolutely the pieces that would be going there. Now the interesting thing was they were a little rough around the edges, and so I've straightened and filed and made them a little more presentable, and they still obviously need paint and such. But that is going to create now basically a rectangular opening because the longerons are angled here. So these sides are actually not parallel. So this is what squares that all up and lets that lid fit on top just right. So I haven't got the lid made yet because the original one's got some extra holes in it. And so anyway, but that's what's going on there. And then, so that I had the bag in for the last video, but I have, you know, done a few extra things there. But mostly, this is what I have done, is I've got the sides in on the fabric on the inside of the cockpit. And that was a big accomplishment, and it went really well. The other thing that's been kind of interesting, like the biggest thing to me, there's two things that are really interesting. First, I guess I'll bring up that the Stewart's glue, which is the green colored glue here, it works really well in these. I mean, I think it just works really well in every situation, but especially this is a really good situation. So I put some of the glue on the back side before, when I first cut this open, and I had flaps that I needed to fold back. So I put some glue on the back side and on the little rod here that frames and such. And then I put glue on the inside of the fabric then as well, and you let all that dry. And then when you bring those two together, it's just like contact cement. And so you just wrap that around and put it on itself, and man, oh man, it just trims that out so nice, clean, and easy. And then I haven't yet, but I'm gonna put a little more glue over the top of all that just to ensure. But as it turned out, that worked really well on all of these openings, which I was a little stressed about all of that. And I was a little stressed about what's gonna go on here in the throttle area, and then even past the throttle area close to the window. And so in looking at a lot of pictures and videos, in fact, so I've got another video in the description. Chad Cole is a guy who restored a Cub a few years back, and he did extensive videos on the process of covering, well, the whole airplane, but especially the cockpit. And that's been really helpful to me to see what he did and to get my head wrapped around it. Again, for me, it's sometimes it's a little difficult. Plus, this is just a difficult task. I mean, I don't, and here's the thing is, if you want it to look nice, you really need to have a good understanding of what the heck is going on before you just dive in. And so like, for example, up here, there's a shroud, sort of, I don't know what else to call it, but it creates a tunnel for the throttle cable. So the throttle's here, and then the throttle cable comes out here and works its way up forward to through the firewall. And this is sort of an awkward spot. If we come around here, so you can see there's this big opening here, and then you've also got this the down tube here that there's the two tubes down here that go from up here, and so which aren't, they're removable, so they're out of the way for right now, but the fabric has to go in back behind that. So especially on this side, you're going behind that, then you got to make sure you get this looking good as you try to make sure things are nice up here and they work their way to the window and around the throttle. So anyway, there's just a lot going on there. And at the moment, I think it's going really, really well. I also think that if you look at different J3s, you'll see there's a little bit of difference in the way that the airframes are, and that may be factory, or maybe it's stuff that's been altered over the years. That's the other thing for sure with a J3, is that there's just so many things that have been changed on these airplanes over the years. And so you never know exactly what you've got. But here's the other big thing that I wanted to mention. So I've seen a couple of videos where people do a special treatment here at the basically sort of the back corner of the rear seat. So the rear seat, the soft seat goes in this area here. So your shoulders are kind of over here, and there's some people will try to glue this fabric to the down tube, which, so here's the tube out here on this side, and and or maybe make some sort of a like a strip to attach and glue to and such. I've seen some of that. But I talked to my friend Mike Finney, and he was telling me that the way he thinks to do it, which I 100% agree, because this not only was easy by comparison, I think this smooth curve, which I don't know if you can really get the feel for it here on the video. Maybe there you can see a little bit more, but it is just so beautiful the way the fabric will shrink up and just find its happy place in the transition from this flat surface over here to the curve up here at the top and kind of more of a point down there intersecting with the flat. And it's so much easier, and it's absolutely beautiful. And the other thing that was kind of interesting that I wondered about, and I had seen something that made me believe that this was going to be, but until I actually did it, I wasn't sure that this little fairlead block for the trim cables and the trim indicator wire were going to be out of the way. But as it turns out, they're not even close to that fabric. I mean, there's 2 inches there with the way that fabric goes around that curve. So it absolutely works out just fantastic. It's easy and it looks beautiful. So there's a little different view maybe of the curve. So anyway, I highly recommend that process. To me, it has so much more of a vintage retro look too with that curve, and the fact that when it does that, there's no blemish of any kind. You don't have to worry about like a glue joint that's kind of wonky. So anyway, that's the scoop there. So the floorboards are just sitting in there. What I decided to do was I have trimmed them down just a little bit further than they were originally so that they are actually removable. Now, once you have them bolted in, you're really not going to be able to remove them unless you have complete access to the bottom side, which this won't have. But at least this means that I can paint the inside, and then I can finish the staining process on the floorboards, and then I can mount them before I put the fabric that'll be on the bottom, which will then eventually restrict the access to some of the fasteners here. But at least that way, I don't have to work around the floorboards trying to paint, putting some tapes and painting and such like that. What I did was I trimmed them to the point that they're pushing out a little bit on the fabric here, so they are sitting just a little bit on the edge of the tube here, like is the plan, although I don't think it's necessary because there's so much other structure down underneath here. And this is a really robust plywood, the 5-ply birch, with the ash veneer on it. And the ash veneer is very thin, but this is a really high quality 5-ply birch. So super strong. I think it's just going to work fantastic. So anyway, I can pop those out real easy then to go ahead and finish the rest of the fabric stuff here inside the cockpit. And then the other thing I was going to show real quick is, so I've pre-glued here now along the top here of the baggage, and then on the top of the circular area here, and I'm going to be filling in these triangles, the 2 triangles and such. And the one thing I just thought I'd show with that was, it's not necessary by any means, but what I wound up doing was I cut this fabric here, and you can see it looks perfectly straight, and it's also, there's no fraying of any kind, because I used a hot knife, which is basically a soldering iron with a nice little blade on it. It's not like a sharp knife blade. It's actually just a little bit wider. I'll show that here in just a second. But it's really nice for this kind of thing. And the whole idea is that then will go right along here. And I don't know, I may be putting a tape over this yet, so it may not even be that necessary. But this is part of the process. I'm trying to understand what does work best with the details related to the fabric and such on the inside of a J3, because it certainly appears that I have a couple more J3s to be working on here very soon. So the more I can understand the process better, then the better I'm going to be able to do, and the faster I can get through it. So real quick over here on the fabric table, so here's that hot knife. So it's not like razor sharp, but man, does that work slick. And then I use a piece of laminate flooring material. as the backer for that. I use the backside usually and a straight edge, and man, that works super slick. So there's the aileron that I showed in the last video. It's just sitting here waiting for its opportunity to get stitched, and it's been ignored because of that darn fuselage. But anyway, so I'm really happy with the way things are going. I really think the Stewart's glue is fantastic to work with, and so I'm no longer afraid. I'm not cocky about it, but I'm not afraid of the interior fabric on a J3. So that's, oh, one last thing I'll show, and then we'll get out of here. So I also did these guys up here, which this is another area where you got a lot going on here from a geometry standpoint. But when you put the heat on that, you get this just incredible compound curve that is just, you know, the fabric will just shrink to make it work. Like, there's no thinking involved. You just put the heat on it and it does the rest. And again, same thing down here. So anyway, that's another thing that's really cool about fabric. I just think it's so stinking awesome. But anyway, there you go. That's the update. Making progress. Got a long way to go, but we're making good progress. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching. Bye.